Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for the Known and Grown Field Day series. This webinar is part of our Field Day series that is so graciously sponsored by NRCS. It is going to be NRCS Programs 101, Programs for Small-Scale Diversified Farms. This webinar is going to be recorded. I'll be sending a link to the recording as soon as we get it all together. If you want to have your cameras on, that's great. If you want to keep them off, that is perfectly fine as well. This will also be put up on our YouTube channel, so you can have future reference to it as well. So a little bit about Known and Grown, if you aren't familiar with us. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are a community of about 75 farmers that we service. Our mission is to help farmers that are within 150 miles of St. Louis that are dedicated to using sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices and humane livestock handling practices. We offer a bunch of different services to our farmers, whether it's connecting them with buyers, organizing volunteer days so they can have projects completed on their farm. We have a local food finder on our website. So when consumers are looking for a specific item raised a specific way, they have an easy way to find that. We organize field days for them and social farmer meetups. So I'm also a known and grown farmer, so it's always nice to have a non-farm related social gathering. We offer micro grants from time to time to our farmers to help them with different projects, and kind of just an all-around technical support. If they're having problems, if they have questions about anything, they can reach out to us and try to get some help with issues. Known and Grown's vision is basically that everyone knows a farmer and everyone has access to good, clean, and healthy food, that having access to healthy food is not a privilege, that farmers are part of the conversation when it comes to local food systems and encouraging farmers to use regenerative and sustainable practices, and also to integrate conservation practices into their farm business. We like to see farmers as conservationists, and we want to include them in that conversation and make sure that their voice is also heard in the conversation. So today's program is going to be a quick primer to the NRCS programs, specifically the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or what is called EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the CSP, and the Regenerative Pilot Program, which is a newer program that's just recently come out. Today on our panel, we have Annalise Lallana. She's based out of Kansas City and is an urban ag specialist with a partnership between NRCS and American Farmland Trust. And she will talk a little bit more about American Farmland Trust in a minute. And we also have Alex Ruff, who is the NRCS Acting District Conservationist in Wentzville. And he also has a very large area that he covers with NRCS. I am Serena Cochran-Stewart. I am your facilitator today. I am the Director of Farm Services with Known and Grown. And I'm also a farmer, and I'm also very interested in implementing some NRCS practices on our farm. One of the things we always talk to our farmers about is before you're making any improvements on your land or on your operation, you want to talk to your local NRCS office. And so we hope that by attending this webinar today, these are some of the questions you'll get answered, so that when you are ready to go and learn more about the programs and maybe sign up, you'll feel a little bit more prepared. So figuring out, do these programs meet your goals? What's the timeline look like for the program and for you? What kind of funds you're going to need to cover your portion of the project, the commitment of the different contracts, and are there any restrictions on the programs? And so we want you to be really prepared when you step into the NRC office to get signed up for these programs. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. You can add questions into the text and into the chat, and we will answer them as we're going. And we'll also have time at the end to answer any questions that you have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Annalise to get it started.
Thanks, Serena. Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. I am Annalise Lallana. I am a Midwest Urban Ag and Small Farm Outreach Specialist. I actually work for American Farmland Trust, but I'm in a partnership position, so I was specifically hired to help do conservation outreach for urban and small farms in the Kansas City area. Some of you may know, like St. Louis used to have an urban ag hub for NRCS that looks a little bit different now, but I was kind of hired to bring some of that same work over here to the Kansas City side. Now that positions have changed, I'm the only one kind of doing this specific urban outreach work for NRCS in the state. So I am also being trained as a conservation planner. I do all of the same things that a planner can do, but I also just focus on this outreach piece. But I will briefly touch on American Farmland Trust, or AFT as I call it, just because that is my employer. But for the sake of this presentation, I am presenting NRCS programs. And just a little bit about like my presentation style. I'm very open to answering questions while we go, and I can see the chat. So if you want to raise your hand during the presentation, I'll either answer your question or let you know that's going to be answered on a slide coming up, or feel free to put it in the chat. And if it's relevant, I'm happy to answer it as we go. So I don't know how many of you might be familiar with American Farmland Trust, but we are a national nonprofit. We're in about 30 states right now. We have 8 different regions. So I'm on the Midwest team, which is Missouri, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then kind of a couple other states, but that's where our primary Midwest focus is. As a conservation organization, we have a mission to promote sound farming practices, protect farmland, and keep farmers on the land. So a lot of overlap with what Natural Resource Conservation Service does and with trying to promote conservation. We have 21 team members on the Midwest team. We have 2 that are here in Missouri, so I am in Kansas City. I did live in St. Louis for 5 years, though, so I do know that side of the state. And then we also have an employee in Columbia he doesn't work on urban ag. He works on agricultural conservation easements. I'll mention him a little bit later. And yeah, some of us are in these partnership positions, and I spend a lot of my time in an NRCS office. So probably everyone knows, but just in case, starting with NRCS, it is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So we're a federal agency under the USDA, and it was created kind of in the Dust Bowl era to support conservation and farming in the US, trying to figure out how to preserve that soil. But now we just look at really all natural resources and how we can conserve those, whether that's water, soil, looking at, we'll talk about resources later, but looking at all of those kinds of things to conserve our natural resources. Under that umbrella, we also offer programs to support producers with conservation. So that can come with money or it could not. We do a lot of just technical assistance to help people. We're really trying to look at problems and find solutions with landowners. Whether or not that falls under a program or cost share, we're always happy to do that. And then we also work with the Farm Service Agency. So if you want to enroll in any NRCS programs, you have to kind of first touch base with the Farm Service Agency, get a farm number. We'll talk about that later as well. Anyone can have a farm number if you have more than 0.01 acres of land that you are operating. So that's about, I don't know, it's a couple hundred square feet. So pretty small. We can get a farm number on there and you can apply for NRCS programs. So we'll start with EQIP. And like Serena mentioned, that stands for the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. If at any point I use an acronym you don't know, just like type in the acronym in the chat and I'll give you the whole thing. But there are a lot of them, so we do tend to shorten some of these programs. But EQIP is kind of the introductory program to NRCS. We can provide technical assistance and financial assistance to agricultural producers, forest landowners, urban growers, gardeners, backyard gardeners, looking to address those resource concerns. So improving water quality, air quality, increasing soil health, maybe creating more wildlife habitat or mitigating against drought, extreme weather. There's quite a lot of programs under, or quite a lot of options under EQIP to meet those resource needs, which we'll go through in a little bit. And then kind of the step up program. So generally I like to think of EQIP as being a really good fit for farmers in like the 2 to 5 year mark and later, but it's really going to be that introductory program. And then after you've maybe done EQIP, you've done a lot more conservation, you might be looking at a longer term program. That's where then CSP might come in. So that's the Conservation Stewardship Program. It operates a little bit differently than EQIP, but it's also a program to provide technical and financial assistance. There is a higher minimum payment than EQIP, but there's also, it's a harder program to qualify for. The kind of the sticky point of CSP right now is that to qualify for it, you have to have been farming 4 out of 6 years between 2013 and 2018. And that's because it was written into the 2018 Farm Bill. Unfortunately, until we get a new Farm Bill, those years are stuck. So if you just started farming in, now I would say the last 10 years, unfortunately, like we can't qualify that land for CSP because we don't have a new Farm Bill yet. Hopefully that'll change. And then there's also now the new RPP program, which is the Regenerative Pilot Program. It is a new program that just came out this year. It's a 5-year contract, which is similar to the Conservation Stewardship Program. That's also a 5-year contract. And it's not really a new program. It's really a variant on EQIP and CSP. And so the only difference is it includes some soil testing at the beginning and at the end of the program. And then there's certain practices that you would have to do to qualify for this RPP program. It's really not suitable for new producers. I'm not going to go into the nuances of why, but if you're interested in RPP, kind of what would happen is you would apply, say like you're either interested in EQIP or in CSP. We would first look to see, are you eligible for that CSP RPP pool? If you're not, we just put your application in normal CSP. Or are you eligible for that EQIP RPP pool? If you're not, then you just go into normal EQIP. So there's no harm in starting to try and look at the RPP program. There is some designated funding for it, but it is a harder lift for small specialty crop production. A lot of NRCS programs, as we go along the way and talk about them, they're really not made for small diversified operations. So we're really trying to figure out how can we use what's there and make it work for producers who are growing vegetables or doing some different types of agriculture on their land. And so kind of how all of the programs work is you start one-on-one with an agent, with an NRCS representative. Typically, we'll come out to your land and we'll start making a conservation plan for you, really outlining the practices that help solve your on-farm issues or your on-farm challenges. Then after that, if you were awarded funding, you would start implementing those practices in your conservation plan. We're hoping that leads to cleaner water, cleaner air, healthier soil, better wildlife habitat, and then also improving your agricultural operation. So EQIP helps producers make conservation work for them. And then financial assistance for practices may be available through EQIP or CSP. And we also have an advance payment option, which I'll talk about later as well. So hopefully I've not lost anyone yet. I know that NRCS programs can be a lot sometimes. But we always kind of start when we are out looking at a farm and talking to producers, like, what are your resource concerns? This is the language that we use in NRCS. You know, we don't give grants. Often people will come to me and be like, I want a grant for a high tunnel. That's not really how our programs work. It's all cost share. And so we have to start looking at what are the challenges or the problems that you're currently having, and what programs might we have that fit on them. So we're always looking to start from your resource concerns first. So things that I often see for specialty crop or urban growers, we're looking at, is there soil erosion? You know, maybe you have some runoff from somewhere. Maybe you have depleted surface water, depleted groundwater. One I see a lot is inefficient irrigation water use. So that's something that we can address. There's a couple of different practices that might help address inefficient irrigation. Sometimes with composting or animal operations, we'll have objectionable odors. That's also a resource concern. Plant productivity and health, that's a big one. We often use that one to justify a lot of practices that we're looking at. Plant structure and composition, plant pest pressure, also a big resource concern. Inadequate livestock shelter, inadequate livestock watering systems. I work with that less in the urban space, but some of my small farmers want to do some livestock. And then energy efficiency with equipment and energy efficiency with farming practices. This is just kind of some of the examples of resources that we are thinking about when we're out looking at land. And then to address these resource concerns, we would start looking at what are our conservation practices. So nationwide, there's like, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of practices, 500, I don't know. There's so many. Each state then takes the practices that they think are best for their state. So you might see something on like one of the websites that we don't actually have. You know, there's all kinds of practices related to like being near an ocean or saltwater contamination. You know, we don't have those things here in Missouri. So we have a list of practices that we can use. Those can be found on the NRCS website. It's the Field Office Technical Guide, and that's public. That all of that information is accessible to the public. It can just be a little bit tricky to find. So always happy to help people sort through that. But these are some of the practices I use a lot in the urban and specialty crop space, those being brush management. This would be what we use to usually tackle honeysuckle or other invasive species. We're going to look at how can we manage those invasive species using brush management. I also do a lot of composting facilities. A lot of my urban growers are really interested in how to be more efficient with their composting systems. And so that's something that we can do on a scale as small as 21 square feet. So that's something we do in the urban space quite a lot. Cover cropping, a lot of conservation practices related to soil health. Fencing we can do as well. There's kind of a caveat to fencing that we can talk about later, but you can use fencing to if you're having pest pressure, which we would consider deer a pest, you might be looking at a deer fencing to help keep those that as a pest out. And then there's some other options as well. Livestock, different things we can use fencing for. We also use heavy use area protection. So this would be maybe if you're having erosion, maybe you have a we've seen it a couple different ways. Often it's for livestock watering systems. You might use some type of heavy area protection to keep erosion around a livestock watering system from getting worse. We've also seen in different situations where if you have a lot of like vehicle traffic on a farm, maybe you have kind of a makeshift dirt road and we're starting to see a lot of erosion in the urban space. We've also been able to address that a little bit with heavy use protection. High tunnels, probably one everyone knows of. For a while, that was the big rage in urban in Kansas City. Everyone wanted a high tunnel. But that's something we can do to look at pest pressure or plant productivity and health. Irrigation is one as well that we see a lot, trying to address that inefficient water use. Another one, this is an interim practice for Missouri right now, but we're hoping it becomes permanent. We've seen a lot of success with it, is low tunnel systems. So that's a really great one if you're looking at pest pressure, like specifically if you're having some type of insect pressure, but you don't really have the space for a whole high tunnel. High tunnels also can come with a lot of big learning curve that low tunnels don't often come with. It's a really great practice that we've seen some really good success with here. We can also do roof runoff structures if you're looking to catch rainwater, soil carbon amendment. So that would be like adding compost or mulch or biochar to your soil to try and increase that soil health. We also have tree and shrub establishment. That'd be where we're looking at maybe supporting wildlife habitat. We could look at fruit trees, native plants. Maybe we have seen a lot of like elderberry in Missouri, a lot of interest there. And those are things that can be supported by that tree and shrub establishment. And then wildlife habitat planting. Often this is colloquially referred to as like a pollinator planting. We'll do monarch plantings, we'll do different habitat plantings, and those are to increase that wildlife habitat. So I'm going to talk through a couple of different scenarios that we've done here in Kansas City, just to kind of give a little bit of example of like what scale are we talking about, and then what resource concerns were we seeing, and kind of what did we do to address those concerns. So there's, no guarantee that your planner would choose these exact same practices or work with you to get to these exact same practices, but there are, we can do things similarly across the whole state. I will say a lot of conservation planners in the state have not worked with super small scale or urban growers. So sometimes being able to come with them, and say, hey, I heard Annalise did this in Kansas City. Can we do this too? That might be helpful to kind of open up that conversation to some of these smaller scale practices. So one of the things that we did, this was on a very, very small community garden. It is situated between two city houses. So there was house. One of the houses burned down. Now it is a small community garden. And so we were looking at with her plant health and productivity. She's having a lot of issues with cats and animals getting into her garden beds. And then she's also having some nutrient loss from her compost pile. So yeah, we have a lot of farms that way in Kansas City, a lot of really incredible teeny tiny farms. But she was looking at nutrient loss from her compost pile. Her land is a little bit sloped, so she would have compost, but then the rain would kind of come and wash off some of those nutrients. So what we did for her in her conservation plan is looked at a high tunnel. So, this is a very small lot, but the smallest high tunnel we can do is a 14 by 16. So it's just a little over 200 square feet, but that is pretty small. And we can do a contract for a high tunnel of that scale. And so there is options for these small growers with a high tunnel. But for her system, based on her needs and what she was looking to do with her space, we wrote in her contract a high tunnel and then a composting system. And she is going to get the smallest composting system. So it's 21 square feet. I think it's 3 by 7. I think that's our smallest one that we can do right now that our engineers have approved. And so a little bit larger, we have a half-acre community farm here as well. One thing that they were much more concerned about was pest pressure, having a lot of insects in their crops, and then also some nutrient loss. So we did a lot of low tunnels for this farm. They're also in a very urban area and were concerned that a high tunnel would would just draw a little bit too much attention. They have kind of a pergola in their space as well. And so they get a lot of unhoused folks that like to hang out there. They were afraid if they had done a high tunnel that they might start having some folks sleeping in there. So to combat that, we operated for low tunnels instead. And so they're about 4 feet high. And I think they used, it's called Never Sink Farms. They're a tool. They have tools and lots of different things for like diversified vegetable farms, but they have a low tunnel system that fit within the specs of our NRCS program. So they were able to do low tunnels, and the cost share for them actually covered 2 different types of covering. They were able to get the insect netting that they use for part of the year, and then they also were able to get some shade cloth with it as well. So we're kind of looking at 2 different resource concerns there. One just being that plant productivity and health, which can be combated in the hot summer days with some shade cloth, and then also that pest pressure. But the other thing they wanted to do was they have just been on their space for quite a long time, and they wanted to add some nutrients back into the soil. So we looked at soil carbon amendment, and for this year, they're going to be adding biochar to their farm to increase that nutrient. And then another one we have, this is a little bit bigger. It's a 10+ acre diversified vegetable farm. One of the things they were having is just some pest pressure as well. And they actually applied for not EQIP, but a CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. And we're doing pollinator habitat strips in between their vegetable rows. And so that's kind of a little bit different use of the program, but something that we're doing for that larger, more established farm. So many things. So one thing I want to mention, and I think it's important to know up front, I think a lot of the programs can be super helpful and super financially supportive of small growers, but they also have, it's a government program. There's also kind of a lot of stipulations to the program. So one thing I like to mention is that every practice has a lifespan attached to it, and that will determine the length of your contract. So if you are just looking at maybe cover cropping and pollinator planting, maybe low tunnels or high tunnel even, those are kind of 5-year to 1-year lifespan projects. So not super long. Usually people can commit to being to their space for 5 years. When we start getting down to fencing and a couple of other practices, I think irrigation is one as well, actually has a program lifespan of 20 years. And so that can be a little bit of a larger hurdle for people to commit to. I often get asked, like what would happen if I move, or what would happen if I lose my land? All of that is always dealt on a case-by-case basis. I have never heard of anyone being asked to give money back, but there is always a little bit of that risk. So I have a chart later that kind of shows like easiest to more challenging for a small grower to implement within our CS programs, but it's just something I like to mention. I think fencing is something that is so expensive, and so if you can get some cost share to support it, it's really fantastic. And also 20 years is a very long commitment. So I like to just always throw that up front so people know a little bit what they're getting into and aren't surprised later on. Oh, and here's that. So this is not NRCS approved. This is my own, I made this chart, but just for kind of when I'm talking to brand new urban or small scale growers, like what is the easiest things to do and what starts to be more complex. So if any of the things we've talked about so far kind of fall into this green area, low tunnels, cover crops, crop rotation, or tree plantings, those are really pretty easy to do. They have pretty short lifespans. The specifications to do them are not very complicated. They're not ground disturbing, so you don't need to get an archaeologist involved, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And then they can increasingly get more complex. And so the complexity here comes with High tunnels have a complexity of sometimes zoning is an issue. So I know someone said they were in Maplewood. If you're in like an urban space, zoning can be an issue with those high tunnels. That's not something NRCS can help you navigate, but it just kind of adds to the complexity of that practice. Composting facilities as well, these require an engineering design. And so it can take a little bit longer to get that practice kind of approved and move forward because we have to get our engineers involved. Fencing as well, it's a little bit more complex because it's got that 20-year lifespan and it's a ground disturbing practice. So we have to talk to an archaeologist as well. And so this is not to discourage anyone from pursuing support for these practices. You'll see a lot of those are also things that cost a lot of money. And so with some cost share, it can really help bring that price tag down for you. But also just to highlight that if you're thinking about, maybe like I really would like some low tunnels, I'm really having issues with pests, like that's a really pretty easy contract for us to put together and would not really be a big paperwork headache for you. I would say definitely go for those things and start to talk to your planners about those. So we've talked about cost share a lot, and it really varies how much NRCS cost share will cover. And that kind of depends on practices, where you're located, what resources you have access to. All of our payment rates are meant to cover about 75 to 90% of the practice to implement it. So let's say you've decided EQIP is right for you. You've decided you want low tunnels and you want to do a tree planting. Our cost share is meant to cover 75 to 90%. Right now, we do also have a higher payment rate for individuals who qualify as historically underserved. I think for this year, it still exists. I think for the future, some of those definitions could change, but it increases that payment rate. We see a lot of producers I work with get to check that beginning farmer box because it has to do with if you filed farm taxes. So maybe you've been growing for 20 years, but you've never filed farm taxes. Maybe you've even sold at a farmer's market. Maybe you've run your own CSA, but you never filed farm taxes. You still qualify as a beginning farmer. Socially disadvantaged, I think that one is probably going to change in the future. Limited resources based on your income, and then veteran farmer status is one of our options as well that increases that payment rate for you. I should also mention, before I talk about this slide, you don't have to go back, that's fine. Oh, what was I going to mention? Oh, it was just there, payment rates. Oh, that for some practices, we have multiple scenarios that have different payment rates. So I'm going to use cover crops as an example. It's a bad example because it actually just took away the small scale payment rate. But it used to be that for cover crops, there was a payment rate per acre. But then if you were under a certain amount of square feet for implementing that practice, you got to use the square foot calculator. And so that payment rate was higher, knowing that you're not being able to utilize those economies of scale. So if you're buying 500 acres, your seed per square foot is going to cost quite a lot less. If you're only doing half an acre, your seed is going to cost quite a lot more. We don't have that for cover crops anymore, but we do still have it for pollinator plantings. And there's a few other practices as well that you might think, oh, well, this is like not gonna, my cost share is only going to be $75. We might have some payment rates that are a little bit better for small scale for some of those practices, that it just recognizing that when you're looking at feet and acres, there's just quite a big difference there. And then for 2026, yeah, there's been a lot of changes in NRCS over the last couple of years. I think I just like to mention that things are still a little bit unpredictable and a little bit tenuous, but everyone is working off the best information that they have, and it does not look like EQIP or CSP as programs are going away anytime soon. I think those are going to stick around One thing to know, we talked about that RPP just a little bit. Kind of 25% of the budget got redirected into that RPP program. So it did prioritize producers who were going to utilize that program. And unfortunately, it just is really not suitable for urban growers. You have to meet a certain conservation threshold for every type of land use that you have. And if you're doing diversified crops on a small space, it's really hard to meet the threshold categories that they've set for it. So it doesn't fit super well, but there is still a lot of funding for EQIP and CSP in the state of Missouri. And then, yeah, just for this next year's, we don't have some of the payment rates, but as of right now, we still kind of have those historically underserved higher rates we did for this past round. So we hope that those stick into the fall of 2020. Is it 26? Yeah, 2026 as well, into next year to 27. So one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that all of our programs are reimbursement. And so you don't have to necessarily pay for your entire contract up front, but you have to pay for the implementation of a practice up front, submit your receipts, get things signed off by your planner, and then your planner reimburses whatever the contracted rate was. But if you qualify as historically underserved, so hitting those criteria, you can qualify for an advance payment up front. This is really fantastic. So kind of how it would work is, let's say you have two practices. I'm going to use a high tunnel and cover crops as an example. Maybe you want to do that high tunnel first, but your high tunnel is going to cost $6,000. We can opt for an advance payment for you and give you that $3,000 up front. And then you have 90 days to spend the money, get that project implemented, and then we would reimburse the second half, the other $3,000. So it really helps. I wish it was 100%. That would be amazing. Unfortunately, it's not, but it does really help with some of that reimbursement, just challenge of floating so much money for the program. So kind of steps to participate. Like, the first thing that you should do is figure out who your planner is. There's a directory on NRCS's website, and just kind of give your local office a call. We also would have to get your farm registered with the Farm Service Agency. So I have in here some information later for our Farm Service Agency County Executive Director here in Kansas City. He used to specifically be an urban county executive director. So he's really helpful at being able to figure out tricky situations. Sometimes we have like farms that are owned by a community organization, but there's a group of operators, and we're trying to figure out, how do we get a farm number for them? How do we prove that they're operators on the farm? And he is helpful with navigating some of those complex situations. Of course, the easiest situation, you're one farmer, you own the land, easy peasy. We can get you a farm number in a couple of hours. But often in like the urban small scale space, I'm working with cooperative farms, I'm working with nonprofit farms, I'm working with a lot of different ownership models. And so FSA can help navigate and still get farm numbers on those unique situations. And then always set a site visit with a planner. So get a planner out there, talk to them about your goals. Sometimes we have where I'll get approached by a grower, and I get out there and it's literally just blank land, and they're kind of hoping that we can come up with a plan and give them a plan. And that's really not the best use of the agency. It's just not really something we do. We don't really design farms for people. We're really there to help you solve your problem. So we want to know, like, what are your goals? Are you trying to scale up? Are you having resource concern issues? Are you having pest issues? Are you having flooding in certain areas? You want to talk to your planner about not only what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, but also where you want to go and what are your goals for your farm to figure out the best plan for you. It's really a collaborative process between the grower and the planner to figure out what's the best fit program, how do we best utilize the resources we all have to get you where you want to go. Once you have that plan, you've decided with your planner what it is you'd like to apply for. The planner puts together your application, submits it for funding and ranking. There's a ranking process. If funded, then we put your plan into action. We usually separate and kind of put one practice a year, but you can always work ahead if you've got multiple practices, and we can close out plans early. But also know, as an agency, it can take kind of a long time. It can take generally anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So if you're like, I got to get cover crops in the next 2 weeks, probably EQIP or CSP is not going to be the program for you. Unfortunately, it's just a process where we only really rank and fund applications one time per year. So generally what that looks like, it's been a little bit stretched out these past couple of years, but we accept applications all year long. Our application window generally closes in December. Last year, it was scheduled to close the first week of October, which was quite early. And then that got pushed to January 15th because of the government shutdown. But just kind of know if you're really looking to maybe implement some practices for next summer, next fall, you really need to start working with your planner really now, maybe August, maybe September, really start to get those site visits set up. We get those applications closed in December, January. Then your planner is going to work with you probably virtually, kind of going back and forth, being like, I know we said we wanted to do cover crops in these 4 beds, but I'm looking at the map and I see 2 more beds in the back. Did you want to do cover crops on those? Do you not want to do cover crops on those? Kind of figuring out those minute details of what exactly was it that you're looking to have happen, and we'll get all of that figured out. And then the application goes into a ranking process. When I say ranking, people think, oh, I can like boost my score. Unfortunately, that's not really how it works. We internally do a process where everyone gets ranked, and almost all of those factors are outside of our control. NRCS will set priorities. Maybe it might be like around a watershed. They're trying to do some extra protection around a watershed, and you happen to fall into that watershed. You may not know that you do, but that's going to boost your application. Or maybe there's some specific funding looking at trying to reduce air pollution in a certain part of the city because you fall into that part of the city and you're doing a practice that might help conserve air quality or protect air quality, then that's going to kind of boost your score. So I say ranking, but there's nothing you can do to increase your ranking score. But everything gets ranked, and then based on kind of the pool of funding, everything that scores above a certain level is going to get funded. There are lots of different funding pools from Missouri, though. We've had some urban ones in the past. Sometimes geographically, there's different fund pools. Sometimes partner organizations have worked through what's called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and they've set priorities, so sometimes you can get funded through those. But generally, that process happens in like March to May. I think this year we went to kind of June for figuring out some of that ranking, but once you're ranked, we know that you've been pre-approved, then you can start implementing your practices. Not until we get that pre-approval can you start implementing any of those practices if you want them to be reimbursed. So generally, I say apply by September. You're going to know probably by June, and then you're looking at late summer or maybe fall to start implementing those practices. So it can kind of take nearly a year from when you start working with your planner to actually implementing those practices. Another timeline consideration, I like to just mention this because we've hit it a couple times where it's really slowed down some urban projects we've had. Anything that is considered a ground disturbing practice has to be reviewed by an archaeologist. Oftentimes those can be cleared pretty quickly. Sometimes in the urban space they can't, though. I think we're looking at having potentially historical artifacts on space like that year is like 1950. So if you have something that's built before 1950 on your land, it might be red flagged for archaeology. And in my area, I mean, I think my house was built in like 1956. Like a lot of the homes can kind of trigger this review process. And unfortunately, the state only has one archaeologist. So when I was talking about fencing or some of these other like a little bit more complex practices, this is kind of one of those factors. So just another thing to talk about when you're working with your planner, if you're looking at fencing or something that might be really ground disturbing, like a livestock pipeline, it may not move as fast as you want it to, unfortunately, because we have to look and see, are there any historically significant things that we need to be looking at and reviewing? Yeah, and I kind of already mentioned this. So it is a competitive ranking process. Unfortunately, not all applications will be funded. It's based on a lot of different criteria, and there's really not any way to affect your ranking score. We have had some priority pools in the past for some of those historically underserved categories. But again, I would not want to guarantee that those are going to be still available in the future. And then I briefly mentioned this, but I just want to highlight it again for any of you that are actually in like truly urban areas. Most practices won't impact zoning. But like I mentioned, high tunnels, we've experienced that in Kansas City where there's a lot of debate of whether or not it's a temporary or a permanent structure, does it need a building permit, etc. So it's just something to think about based on your space. Is this a process I'm going to have to go through or kind of deal with? And it is not really something that NRCS provides support for. If we know, we might mention it. Like if I'm going to be in the city and I'm talking with a producer and they're talking about a high tunnel, I'm definitely going to bring it up. But it's really on you as the producer, as the farmer, as the grower to know whether or not what you're doing is complying with your zoning regulations for your city or your municipality. Um, and I like to mention this as well. It's this is not a beginner program, but I just like to mention too, my colleague who works in Columbia, he works with the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, and what he does with landowners. These are going to be owners that want to protect their farmland permanently. They want to make sure it stays farmland in the future, and so he helps them look at agricultural land easements to basically say this is not going to be anything except for farmland. So if in the future, or if you know farmers who are starting to maybe age out or thinking about kind of that transition plan, what that looks like, the ASAPL program can really help support growers who want to protect that land. Just a couple quick facts, things he likes me to always mention. At no point does the owner not maintain ownership of the land. They maintain it before, during, and after the easement transaction, and they're not selling their land to the government. That can be sometimes a misconception around how agricultural land easements work. Another thing to consider is that landowners who wish to do this with their farms need to kind of partner with a land trust who's going to help monitor that easement, make sure that it stays, make sure there's no development if that's been put into the contract. And then kind of an easement process can take 2 to 3 years. So again, if you kind of know a farmer who's maybe aging out and they're looking at some transition options, the ASAPL program is really supportive, and it's also really underutilized in Missouri. So often there's still budget in there to help farmers protect their farmland. And so this is my colleague. Hopefully these slides will go out to you guys, but he works in Columbia and he works on this program. As I mentioned, farm number, this is, Neil Rudisill. He used to be our Urban County Executive Director here in Kansas City for Farm Service Agency, but he's really great at working with unique situations and figuring out some of that land ownership, those land ownership challenges to get you guys farm numbers in urban spaces. And then I think we did it. So I think we're down to just questions now. If you'd like, I'm happy to answer, but also Alex is a CD. He probably knows way more than I do. And then I also have the questions that Serena gave me before that everyone who registered submitted. So I'm happy to go over some of those as well.
Thanks, Annalise. That was super informative and answered some of the questions that I had too. So, if you have any other questions, you can add them into the chat or you can just unmute yourself. I will be sending a link for evaluations and a follow-up email. The link that I sent did not work. And I do want to mention 2 upcoming in-person field days that we have going on. This Sunday, we're going to be down in DeSoto talking about converting pastures to native warm season grasses. And then kind of going along with the EQIP is that we're going to be in Ferguson, outside the city at Earth Dance, talking everything you want to know about setting up high tunnels and how to maximize production and extension, extending your seasons, your growing season. And all of our in-person field days, if you're a farmer, whether it's a farmer who's in full production right now and has years of experience, or you're just starting out as a beginning farmer, you can apply for one of our micro grants. With the warm season grasses, it's a $300 micro grant, and for the high tunnel field day, it's up to $1,000 micro grant. And the follow-up email, I will be sending links to those as well. So do we have?
That's cool. So you guys do like for attendees, they get to apply for micro grants?
Yeah, the last one we had for silvopasture, we gave out almost $5,000 in grants for people to plant trees and implement silvopasture practices.
What a great idea. Like, look at the practice and then here's funding. I'm gonna write that down and maybe suggest it for some of our programming.
Yeah, and we also offer technical assistance so they can get a 30-minute consult with the host and limited site visits. So if someone, like say with the high tunnel field day, was thinking this is where I'd want my high tunnel, but I don't really know, and they apply for a grant, they could have Jenna come out and say, yes, this looks like a great place, you know, to set up, and these are things to consider, and yeah.
Awesome.
All right, looks like we don't have any questions. Don't be shy. Like, this is a chance to pick the brains of the people who are implementing these programs. And
Yeah, maybe do you want me to just pick a couple off of the
yeah,
sheet unless people fill some in? Okay. So, yeah, one of the questions that was on here was how small of an area can be considered for the program. The smallest we can do for a farm number is 0.01 acres. So that's just a couple hundred square feet. So I've never run into anyone that was too small for us to do a farm number on there and get them into the program.
Can I add just a little bit onto that,
For
Annalise?
sure. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, awesome presentation. That was really good. You did awesome. Yeah, when it goes to working with the Farm Service Agency, especially this time of year, you know, the reporting crops and all that, just if you're wanting to get a farm number and all that, call them first. Definitely reach out to them and schedule an appointment. Because if you show up with a brand new entity that they've never seen before, you know, it's going to take a little bit to get them set up. So make sure you call and schedule an appointment first. And along with that, you know, especially like for the entities, you know, make sure you have, you know, your folks that can sign contractual papers for those entities. Um, and, you know, we've run in circumstances where sometimes that, you know, the entities, they change, you know, change people or things like that. And people leave when new people come in. You know, we had a scenario a couple weeks ago where everybody that we had for signature authority for an entity didn't even work there anymore. So that came into kind of a headache. So, I mean, things change. Everybody knows that. You know, partners change. So if that happens, just make sure you keep us and FSA in the loop so we can keep everything up to date on these contracts. It just makes it way simpler for both the producer and the government agencies, of course.
Yeah, I think one thing, I've been here for 3 seasons now, and I've really noticed that there's quite a pattern in how busy seasons work for NRCS. So please don't call anyone in February asking for um, a lot of help with these things. But like July is a great time to get a farm number. August is a great time to get a farm number. We've kind of finished contracting, and so it's a little bit of a slower season. So definitely, if you're wanting to do the program, make sure that you leave a lot of time if you have a little bit of a complicated situation. Something else that was asked on here was grants available for construction of greenhouses. Unfortunately, I don't know of any that would be available. We do the high tunnels, but as far as like a heat or a cooled greenhouse, that's not really something we have cost share for.
Aaron, you have a question? Do you want to unmute?
For y'all, I have a question around the preparation for the land. If the watershed is, if you know it's in a historical, like contaminated watershed, and you want to do some like rain gardening, and catchment to improve the creek. So it Clearwater Creek or Coldwater Creek, the radioactive creek, is at the bottom of the land that I'm working on of my home. It's 7 acres, and so I'm trying to build. I have ducks, so trying to build out like a little creek that they could, so they can have like not anyway. Is there any way to get support about is the rain, you know?
You're breaking up, Aaron.
Frozen. Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. We heard some of that. You were talking about the contaminated creek, 7 acres, looking for some support with your ducks, but we did miss that last bit of what you were asking.
Yeah, I was just asking, is there any water, is support if you know that there's radioactive water? Like if you know in building up the watershed, like in supporting that, is there a specific place that I should be looking at? I already have a farm number.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if she has a number to that land. I have a farm number as a farmer to a urban space. So then my second question was about grading. If you are getting a lot and you have to get it like level and it's a city lot,
Mhm.
um, is there any support in working on the like if they're already zoning it as a green space?
Mhm.
Is there any
I'll start and then I'm gonna let Alex chime in as well. To my knowledge, the only thing that we have right now, if there is proven contamination, would be support for raised beds. And that's more looking at soil contamination, not necessarily water contamination. But we do have, as an interim practice, if you have soil contamination, we can cost share on then raising beds and bringing soil in to help mitigate that contamination. Um, and then as far as like moving the land in an urban space, I don't know. We've kind of like teetered around with some of that. Uh but I've not seen it done yet. I think that'd be kind of, I don't know, really have to convince someone to think about some of that. And if we could really make it fit into a program. Alex,
Okay.
I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's a really good question. As far as about the contamination and the water and all that, there's nothing really that I know of other than what Annalise talked about with the raised beds. And one big thing to know about NRCS is, if the site is stable when we get there, we're not going to do anything to destabilize that and increase soil erosion. So I think part of what you're talking about on that lot clearing. So what I have seen possible is say somebody has a garden. So for all of our high tunnels, you have to have a cropland land use, right? We can't just put a high tunnel on mowed grass, which is considered associated ag land in our minds, it has to be a cropland. So say you have a tilted garden, but you also kind of want to level it out. So of course the high tunnel can actually sit there. You know, grading is kind of a foregone income or a foregone expense that's within the scope of a high tunnel. So at certain times, yes, there's cost share, but at the same time, it's wrapped up in that cost share of the high tunnel itself. I don't know if that answered your question at all, because I think you were just talking about maybe clearing a lot to make it a green space, and in that circumstance, unfortunately, there's no real practice standards that fit that.
Yeah, I do want to say just two more things that made me think of. One is that, like Alex said, we wouldn't want to destabilize something that's already there, but we might be able to talk to you about different practices to help mitigate what you're doing. So maybe you want to still grow on that curve. We could talk about like where to put in trees or where to put in bushes or how to make some ridges to help catch water and slow the flow of that water. Those are definitely things we could do, but maybe not necessarily have cost share for. And then the other thing I was going to mention when looking at some of these small scale practices and high tunnels, kind of depending on, like Alex was saying, if you wanted to put a high tunnel in, thinking about grading it is already kind of part of the cost share. With high tunnels specifically, what I've seen is that if you have the network to do the labor yourself, then that cost share is going to go a lot farther. And so maybe you're doing a high tunnel and you want to grade it and you think like, are the finances going to work out? Maybe if you're able to get some volunteers or connect with Known and Grown or some other groups that can get you some labor to help put in that high tunnel, that might be a cost share or like a cost savings way to then fund some of that grading, if that makes sense. Oh, you're muted, Erin.
This the responses were choppy, but this I'm definitely going to rewatch the recording and be emailing for more information. Thank y'all for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. Another question that was on here was just kind of looking at what would be available for a micro farm just starting out. I think we kind of covered a lot of that, but I like to tell new growers, you know, sometimes I look at spaces that no ground has been broken on. I think NRCS really comes into play and is really helpful in that 2 to 5 year mark. So I always tell growers, if you've got a brand new space, you're looking to get started, put something in the ground and then call us the next year and let's see how we can improve upon that operation. Also a question on here about NRCS operation for nonprofit farms. Absolutely. We've worked with nonprofits and sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes, you know, we have a couple farms here who just have leases with the city. If you've got that lease that says, yeah, I have operating ability on this land for 20 years. I only want to do a practice that lasts 5. It's pretty simple to get that farm number set up and we can get you going. That's most
How
of
do
the
you do
questions
that?
that were in.
How do you make that happen?
Get the city to give you land.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
been my
that's a great
every
question.
farm session I've ever been in. I help a lot of farmers, but I don't have my own land yet. I have like my family's land and my friends' lands that I'm working on. But yeah, so how do you do that?
Yeah, if you have any of that land that you're working on, if you have a formal written agreement, then you can become an operator on that land and apply for NRCS programs on that land. And then if you don't have, like maybe you don't have a lease that says you can be there 5 or 10 years, if the owner of that land gives you operating permission, which is kind of, it's like a form, there's a form that has to be filled out, then you can apply for NRCS programs for that land. And then Jason, yes, that would include religious nonprofits as well. Yeah, I've been at a few farms that are on church grounds, and those would also be eligible for nonprofit or for cost share programs.
All right, we still have time if anyone has any other questions, or Alex, if you have anything that you want to add to that.
No, I don't think so. I think she touched on a vast majority of it. The only other note I had, if when you get a contract, like it's a contract and there's certain constraints, and I know she talked about that. One of the biggest ones that people get kind of hung up on is that you have to, no matter what, complete something in the first 12 months. So a lot of times a good planner, if they're working with you, they'll pick out something that's, semi easy in the first 12 months, kind of get you acclimated to the federal contract guidelines. But yeah, something has to be done in the first 12 months. And it's really good just to keep an open line of communication between yourself and the NRCS planner. Like she said, certain times a year, we're kind of running around ragged. Like right now, I'm covering 5 counties. It's kind of hard to do, but it never hurts to even shoot a text or a phone call, giving a status on a project or something like that, just to kind of keep that relationship building and keep it going between both the producer and the agency.
Jason is asking if there's any support related to creeks. They have a creek on their property that they just purchased.
I mean, it's possible. It's really hard to answer that without seeing it. It would, of course, there would need to be a resource concern there, and of course, erosion's probably one of them if it's in the St. Louis area. A lot of constrained and overflowed creeks and rivers. There's a lot of erosion, but it's very possible.
Yeah, I've seen like riparian structures, or really it's different things to kind of think about erosion, or if you had maybe animals or like a composting system and we were worried about nutrient contamination into that creek, there might be some other kind of buffers or mitigation to keep that nutrients from running off into your creek.
So with the high tunnels, you have to kind of already have a production going, and then you're just going to put a high tunnel in that area. Like with this creek, I know he doesn't have any animals on there now. Would he need to have animals on there first, or would it be like, I'm looking to get, say, goats, and I want to make sure they're out of this, they never get into this area?
That's a great question. So we would need to be addressing a concern that already exists. And so if there were goats and they were getting into the water, then that would be where we might be able to look at fencing or some other exclusion to keep the animals out of the water, looking at conserving that water quality. Yeah, I mean, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't like exclude that area thinking in the next year you're going to get goats or get an animal. We're really looking at what is already a concern.
Correct, because when we go out there and you get ranked and assessed and all that, you're basically getting assessed on your time of application. So, I mean, if there's not livestock out there, then we technically don't have that resource concern to pay for that fencing and that access control, unfortunately.
Yeah, but if you didn't have animals and you did have significant erosion problems just because of the way that the creek is running, that's a concern that we can address.
Correct. Correct.
I'm going to drop in the chat that field office technical guide. And this has all of our practices that are available in Missouri, and you can actually look at kind of the documents of what's required for each of those. It can get a little bit technical, so don't like get too bogged down into it. But if you're thinking like, I really want something that helps with blank, I'm not sure what that is. And it's worth scrolling through there and just seeing like the whole catalog of what we offer in the state that might fit. And that's all public information.
I'll add that to the follow-up email and put it in the YouTube description as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we use that site a lot, and I always like to remind people that it's public site. Anyone can look at it and get those documents, whether or not you're in our program. Sometimes they're helpful. And sometimes you want to do something on your own, maybe like it's just too long to wait for applying, but you're really wanting to do a tree planting, like you could look and see what do we consider to be the best methods, how you protect those seedlings. You can look at all of those specs, and it's all very, very research, very science-based of how to implement these practices.
So Jason's asking for water conservation with land shaping qualify, like swales to slow the water and direct to a pond and encourage the soaking into the ground before running off. So yeah, with berms and swales, terracing.
No, Alex, take that one. Most of the plots I work with are like less than half an acre. We are not doing terracing on them.
Yeah, so not necessarily. I'm not going to say no because every circumstance is different. Um, for instance, I had a producer in Lincoln County that wanted to, you know, direct the Quiver River away from his farm and onto his neighbors. We can't do that. We can't redirect streams or flow, bodies of flow, but um, there is other things for water conservation that we can do. Land shaping probably isn't one of them because, like I said, we can't go to a stable site and destabilize it because while you might be helping one resource concern, you're going to completely throw off the soil erosion part. So it's on a case by case basis, but on that one, I'd probably say probably not. But there is other water conservation practices that we could do that are not land altering.
He was referring specifically to rainwater slowing down a grade. So
Yeah, and it's like all of our terracing that we do is all on it's on crop ground. It's pretty in depth, and it's terracing. Of course, they're pretty large, and they take a lot of engineering on some of these farmer fields. I'm not saying it's not made for small scale ag, because it might be possible, but I don't necessarily see that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I've seen some small farms do some really cool things with kind of creating some berms and swales on like a smaller scale using, just some trenching and then some mulch. Those might be things that, you know, advice wise that we could help you out with, but we don't necessarily have a cost share program that fits with it. But you might be able to connect with someone who's seen a system like that. I was just out at a farm. It's here in Kearney. It's called Fair Share Farm, and they do about an acre of vegetable production, and their whole land is on a pretty decent grade. And so they created, every couple 100 feet, they created big trenches, mulched it up, and then that's really slowed the water down for the grade and figured out how to work in their space really well to keep water and to keep erosion at bay, but not necessarily taking a bulldozer to completely regrading the whole landscape. Do we have ponds? I know in this county, we only really soil and water conservation does ponds. Does NRCS do ponds, Alex?
We do ponds. So ponds are really made for so say you got, some cattle and you can't get water to the back or water or electric for the pump in the back 40 of your property. We'll build a pond, not for the cattle to get in the pond, but you can construct a pond if the site has erosion, right? So we're going to try and stabilize it with a pond to make a pool, and then you're going to gravity feed livestock watering tanks off of that pond. That's going to keep water year round. So it is possible to get a pond through NRCS. It's not. It doesn't happen very often, but we do have ponds.
Yeah, they like to say in my county that everywhere that was good for a pond already has a pond. So we
Yeah,
don't see a
pretty
lot of them
much.
anymore.
Pretty much.
And Jason asking about physically accessing the farm. So we, like I mentioned here in Kansas City, we have done one in one instance where there was some pretty bad erosion because of how they had to drive in and out of their farm, and our engineers worked with us to do some heavy use protection area for that road, for that travel way for them. So it might be something that we could assist with. I think it's something that complex is going to be a case by case basis, and you want to get a planner out there to look at it with you.
And I feel like kind of one of the key takeaways too is it's better to ask your NRCS office and have them say yes or no. And I feel like when I've called and asked questions, and it's like that's not something that we do, call this agency. So like y'all are kind of in the know of other agencies that could assist. And so even if NRCS says no, you might say go to Soil and Water or go here or go there. And so it's not going to be completely fruitless to
Yeah,
contact it.
absolutely. And I think too, what I like to tell people, if like we got a call to one of our planners and they're like, hey, can you pave my road for me? I'm having some issues. They're going to say no. But if you get a planner out there and they look at the erosion and they see what's going on and they think about the practices, like there might actually be some way to have some assistance for the problem that you're experiencing. If things don't fit in that correct box, just by maybe a phone call or such, you might get like an immediate no. But sometimes there's some flexibility or some thinking a little bit creatively about the programs. Don't tell them I said that though.
Well, thinking about Jason specifically, sorry, Jason, I'm going to use you as an example. He's been attending a lot of our field days and they have a pretty blank slate of what they're doing. When you said NRCS offers technical assistance, like could he just call NRCS for technical assistance saying, I have this blank slate. These are the certain problems that I have and that I'm seeing could be an issue in the future. Can I have someone come out and kind of help me assess, no, you don't want to do X, Y, and Z there because that's just going to totally wash out this whole hillside. And so at least get him on the right page before he starts making one of the many mistakes he'll make as a farmer and maybe cut those down a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think all the planners I know love to get out of the office. And so if you invite them out to your property, they're going to want to come and help you as best they can. Or maybe they see your property and they're like, oh, I worked with this farmer 5 years ago. They had a really similar situation. Maybe I can get you in contact with them. Lots of different options. I do specifically do outreach, so I'm pretty in the know of all the other programs. Sometimes when you're in other counties, that's not so much the case, but usually we can refer you to someone to help get you on that right path for sure. And to reiterate those historically underserved categories, so that's going to be a beginning farmer rancher. That would be farming less than 10 years and not filing farm taxes for it. Socially disadvantaged is going to be basically a non-white farmer. And then limited resource is going to be based on an income capacity. So I don't remember what it's at right now, but basically if you make under about $30,000 a year, you would qualify as limited resource. And then veteran farmer as well is one of those categories. And those may change. We kind of heard some hubbub about them changing, but they were still in our system for this past round. So as of right now, they're still there. And I'm super happy to talk to anyone one-on-one. I'm always happy to set up a call, help you figure out who your planner is, even maybe introduce you to your planner, help facilitate some of that. I know I'm on the other side of the state, but I know how to navigate some of the systems and find that information.
Yeah, I found on the NRCS website, I forgot what I was looking for. And I was like, oh, okay, that's like I found it. And then when I tried to find it again, I couldn't follow the chain back to where it was. And so I think a lot of times it's just knowing what exactly to click on the website. And since you guys are a little bit more well-versed in that, it would be, I think, a lot easier to say, oh, here, I'll send you the link. It's a done deal. Kind of.
Yeah, sometimes there's really good information that can be kind of hard to find. I usually have to dig through my many bookmarks to find you to get you to the right page, but happy to help anyone navigate that.
All right, so we are coming up on 7:30. I will be sending out a follow-up email, and I will be including Annalise and Alex's contact information along with a bunch of other resources. So if your question didn't get answered or you think about something else later on, please reach out. And thank you very much, Annalise and Alex, for being here with us this evening. I know this isn't your regular work schedule time. And thank you everyone for showing up for this. And please reach out to me if you have any questions or need assistance with anything else.
Yeah, thank you all for having us.